Hi, I'm Dr. Lori Schwartz-Reichel. My career began in music education where I learned the importance of a key change, a shift, in the tonal center of a piece of music, often used to inject energy or produce significance. Eventually, I realized the impact of making key changes in all areas of my life and the desire to help others do the same. Making key changes can be difficult. I certainly don't have all the answers, but I do like to pose questions for reflection and offer actionable key changes for us to attempt in both our working and living situations. Together, we can unlock our greatest potential in collaboration with those we love, serve, and lead. Let's discover how we can grow together by making key changes. For the last 2 weeks, we have been reflecting on meaningful conversations that can lead to organic thought partnerships and greater connections or growth. In episode number 56, titled Thought Partners, I spoke about the benefits of a thought partnership and possible ways to establish one. And last week, in episode number 57, titled Strike Up a Conversation, I suggested how to begin a conversation with a stranger, a colleague, a student, or even a loved one. I told the story of how I randomly met a woman named Jen on a plane, struck up a conversation, and developed a friendship and thought partnership with her. Another chance meeting of mine turned into a recent and powerful thought partnership. A little over a year ago, I met Dan Eschliman at a musical rehearsal for our children. I immediately knew we would become friends. Dan is quirky and kind, two unique traits often forgotten these days. Since that meeting, Dan and I have championed each other's work. He asked me to assist him with our children's school musical this year. Also, I attended his church's Christmas cantata performance in December with my mom and daughter, where we loved listening to the beautiful music and watching Dan conduct. Dan follows my speaking work, often asking me to share about my travels. We talk about education, music, family, and more. We learn from one another. We have become thought partners. A few weeks ago, Dan sent a text message to me asking, "Do you mind if I quote you in my sermon this Sunday?" Dan is the director of worship at a Methodist church in our town and was offered the opportunity to preach that weekend. This is not my church or denomination, but my children and I have attended several events there over the years, and my husband grew up belonging to this church. We always feel welcome and enjoy our time there. I was completely caught off guard by Dan's request. First, I was shocked that he regularly listens to my podcast. Second, I was honored that he wanted to include my thoughts in his sermon. And finally, I was touched that Dan took the time to ask if he could include my quote in his sermon. I was thankful that Dan shared with me how he was inspired by my words. I always say, when we put our work out in the world for others to experience, we have no idea if they take it in, like it, are inspired by it, or share it, unless they tell us. It can be detrimental when there is no feedback on our work. Lack of feedback can contribute to burnout by leading to feelings of stagnation, disengagement, and a sense of being undervalued, ultimately impacting motivation and productivity. In episode number 53, titled Beat Burnout, I speak of how a lack of feedback is a leading cause of burnout. After this episode is over, check out episode number 53, too. I attended Dan's sermon that Sunday because he told me. He gave a remarkable sermon to his congregation on Transfiguration Sunday. It felt special that he included a quote from my podcast, Making Key Changes, on that particular Sunday, as Dan shared through his preaching that the magic of transfiguration is the magic of change. Dan went on to preach about uniqueness. Ironically, this is a favorite word of mine. And he also spoke about the desire to become the very best version of ourselves, which is the essence of my work. Dan sprinkled my quote within his tremendous words. I got a little choked up. I never expected my words to be shared in a church setting, but there they were, thanks to Dan. He had woven our work together so beautifully. Dan is an eloquent speaker, a compassionate human, and a true community builder and connector. Dan's request to utilize my quote had opened a window to a thought partnership, and a door was about to open for us to work together in more amazing ways. After Dan asked if he could include my quote in his sermon, I asked him to review the information about the Confidence Camp. During the fall and winter, while brainstorming this camp, I encountered many barriers, mostly securing an ideal venue in our local area. I had originally considered churches as potential camp locations. I read the information on both my church and Dan's church's websites about renting space. I emailed the appropriate contacts beginning in October and waited patiently for responses. I received a no from my church since my company is not a nonprofit, and I followed up several times with Dan's church, but little response was reciprocated. Once I shared the camp idea and advertising with Dan, he immediately championed the cause and created a pathway for me to successfully offer the camp at his church. He asked me why, back in the fall, I didn't approach him as a connection for the camp to be held at his church. I told him I'm a rule follower and I didn't want to mix personal connections with business. Dan's response was something like, "But doesn't an entrepreneur make connections to find a way?" Dan's right. But our friendship was new, and at the time, I didn't want to ask too much of him. Usually, I am not afraid to ask for things I want, as this is the advice I give others. To just ask. I tell them this all the time when they want something in their life or work. The saying goes, if we don't ask, the answer is always no. Including others in the asking process can be complicated, yet by nurturing relationships, we can often create opportunities that we may not even imagine. When we ask for things, we need to be prepared for rejection, though. In episode number 54, titled Redirection, Not Rejection, we discussed setbacks in loving, learning, and leading. We considered how failure or rejection may redirect us to something even greater than our original goal. Turns out, one little question to Dan could have saved me months of burden. However, frustration led me to a place of gratitude. Just like Jen from the plane, I know that Dan and I will continue to champion each other's work, support one another through life, and serve as friends and thought partners for one another in a mutually beneficial way. Asking for what you want can be difficult and nerve-wracking. Consider these 5 key changes for asking for what you want in a confident yet humble way. Key change number 1. Clarify what you want. Be sure about what you're asking for and how you would like it. Be specific and certain it's something you genuinely need or desire. Be direct and clear. Avoid beating around the bush, but also be polite and respectful in your request. Key change number 2. Choose the right time and place. Timing matters. Make sure the situation is appropriate and choose a time when the person will likely be receptive and open to your request. Key change number 3. Consider the other person's perspective. Think about how your request might affect the other person. Be empathetic and try to frame your request in a way that resonates with their needs or interests. Confidence is important, yet sensitivity in your approach should be considered too. Present your request in a way that's assertive, yet considerate. Key change number 4. Explain why you're asking. Provide context. Let the other person know why you need or want what you are asking for and how it could impact you, them, or others. Share the immediate benefits or potential for growth for those you or they love, serve, or lead. And key change number 5, express gratitude. Thank the person for considering your request. Gratitude goes a long way in maintaining positive relationships. Once you have asked, prepare yourself for an immediate or delayed response or different outcomes than you hope. including a no. Don't take the response, especially if it is a negative one, personally. An explanation on the other person's part could lead to an alternative inquiry on your part, or you may need to try again with your request at another time. Asking for what we want often involves vulnerability, fear of rejection, or even the anxiety of not knowing if we deserve it. Sometimes we might second guess ourselves or worry about burdening others. However, if we never ask the question, we will never know the answer. Unlock your confidence and ask for what you want in the kindest way. If you found this episode helpful or enjoyable, please share it with others. It's the best way to get the word out about this show. Access the show notes for some resources. There is a link to my website and one where you can sign up for the Making Key Changes newsletter to receive weekly content delivered directly to your email inbox each Wednesday. My main work is public speaking, so if you feel the contents of this episode or any of my talks or courses would add value to your school district, company, or organization, just ask me. How are we making key changes to ask for what we want? Thanks for listening. If you haven't done so yet, please consider rating and reviewing the Making Key Changes podcast on the Apple Podcast app. If you found this episode helpful, please consider sharing it with others and joining me again next week. In my coming episodes, I'll discuss topics that are most passionate to me, along with things I've been researching or areas of my life I have changed or want to change. You can learn more about me on my website, makingkeychanges.com. Feel free to message me through there or reach out on social media. I'd love to hear from you and learn about what key changes you hope to make.